Al Pacino stood up from his chair on the Tonight Show stage. Not when the segment ended. Not when Jimmy asked him to. Mid-sentence. He stood, turned toward the audience, and walked off the stage without saying a single word. Jimmy Fallon didn't move. The band didn't play. 300 people in that studio watched one of the most celebrated actors in the history of American film step off the edge of the stage in complete silence and disappear into the audience. There was no microphone. There was no explanation from the desk. There was only Al Pacino moving through the rows and the sound of 300 people who had completely forgotten to breathe. It was a Tuesday night in October 2023. The Tonight Show had booked Al Pacino to promote a new film, one of the rare occasions he agreed to sit for a full, late-night interview. The audience that night was a particular kind of crowd, mostly men and women in their late 50s and 60s. People who knew exactly where they were the first time they heard Michael Corleone speak. Many had come from well outside the city. Some had waited in line since morning. Pacino walked out in a dark jacket, moving slower than the cameras expected, and the audience rose before Jimmy even finished the introduction. The interview had gone easily, relaxed, honest. Funnier than most people expected from a man with his reputation. He talked about the early years in New York, about the particular fear that never quite leaves an actor no matter how long they've been working. Everything was calm. Everything was moving well. The Tonight Show's senior producer later said she had never seen him so at ease on a late-night set in her 22 years in the business. The control room still talks about the next 4 minutes. Jimmy had just asked him about the beginning, the lean years, the off-Broadway work, the long stretch before anyone knew his name. Pacino leaned back in his chair and smiled slightly, the way people smile when they are about to say something they have turned over for a very long time. He began to answer. And then he stopped. Not because he forgot the words, not because the question caught him off guard. He stopped because something in the third row caught his eye. A woman was holding something up. Not a phone. Not a sign. Just a program. Small, old, slightly curled at the edges. The kind of thing that has no business surviving 54 years in anyone's possession. And yet here it was, held up carefully with 2 hands by a woman sitting very still in the third row. Like an offering. Like something that had been waiting for exactly this moment. Not framed. Not laminated. Just a program. Faded and soft at the folds, the edges worn from handling. Pacino's eyes moved to it, the way eyes move when the mind has already understood something the body hasn't caught up to yet. His mouth closed. The half-formed sentence he had started dissolved completely. His right hand, which had been open in the air mid-gesture, came slowly down and rested on the arm of his chair. He sat very still for 1 second. Then 2. Then he stood up. Jimmy Fallon said nothing. He leaned forward. Al? Low, 2 syllables. The way you say a name when you genuinely don't know what is happening. The entire studio froze. He hadn't been dismissed. The segment wasn't over. Jimmy hadn't signaled anything. The questions moved through the room in silence. Had something happened? Was he unwell? He was 83 years old. Was he okay? The band watched from the platform, instruments in hand, not playing. The floor crew didn't move. Jimmy Fallon stayed perfectly still behind his desk, as though any motion might break something that shouldn't be broken. Pacino didn't look at Jimmy. He didn't look at the cameras. He stepped off the edge of the stage, a drop of about 3 feet, and walked into the center aisle of the audience. Just before he moved, his voice came, barely above a whisper, but caught perfectly by his lapel microphone. Ellie. Just the name. Nothing else. 300 people held their breath. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1969. Al Pacino wasn't always Al Pacino, icon and legend. In October of 1969, a 29-year-old Al Pacino was performing in an off-Broadway production in a 60-seat theater in Greenwich Village. The show had no reviews and no advertising beyond a small listing in a theater circular almost no one read. He remembers it was cold. He remembers a space heater at the back of the stage that ticked every time the temperature outside dropped. He had been in New York for nearly a decade. He had studied at the Actors Studio. He had done stage work that paid nothing and film parts that paid almost nothing. He was 29 years old and had begun, quietly, to consider the possibility that the life he had chosen might not work out. That Tuesday night, the show ran for an audience of 11 people. 4 left at intermission. He was loading equipment into a car in the alley behind the theater when he heard footsteps on the wet concrete. Eleanor Vasquez was 23 years old. She was in her first year teaching drama at a high school in the South Bronx, and she had come to the show alone because she had seen his name in a listing and felt, without any reason she could articulate, that she needed to be there. She had no connection to the production. She had taken 2 buses and arrived 10 minutes late and sat in the back row of a nearly empty room. She came alone because none of her colleagues understood why she kept spending her evenings watching unknown actors perform for empty seats. She found Pacino in the alley and didn't apologize for being there. She said, "I've watched actors for 3 years. I've never seen anyone do what you just did in that room. You were performing for 11 people like it was the only performance that would ever exist." He set down the equipment case he was holding. They talked for over an hour in the cold. She talked about her students, kids from the Bronx who had never seen a professional stage production but performed with complete commitment because they had nothing to lose. He talked about staying inside a character when the room felt indifferent. When she finally moved to leave, she asked if she could keep the program. He took it and wrote something on the inside cover. "For Ellie, you saw me before anyone else did." October 1969. She kept the program in a box in her apartment for 54 years. She never showed anyone the inside cover. She used it in her classroom every year as a teaching document, the production notes, the cast breakdown, an example of what serious theater looked like before the world noticed it. She never told her students where it came from. She taught drama in the South Bronx for 31 years. She had 2 daughters and 4 grandchildren and a small apartment in Yonkers lined with programs from shows most people had never heard of. She attended every Al Pacino film on opening weekend, every single one, for 50 years. She never reached out. She said she didn't want to remind him of a night he had probably long forgotten. She wanted to stay in that alley in 1969 when they were both nobody and everything was still possible. In February 2023, Eleanor Vasquez was diagnosed with congestive heart failure. Doctors gave her 3 to 5 months. Her youngest daughter found the program in the box during a quiet afternoon in March and sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours before writing an email to Al Pacino's management team. The response came the following morning. The arrangement was made quietly. The Tonight Show staff were told only that a guest in the 3rd row was to be seated early and left completely undisturbed until after the interview concluded. No one on the production team was told who she was. No one was told about the program. Pacino had said, very simply, to the one member of his team who knew, "I want her to feel like a person, not a moment." Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Behind the scenes, Al Pacino had made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. He had told no one on the production staff what was in the 3rd row. He had carried his own copy of the program in the inside pocket of his jacket since that afternoon. Ellie believed she had simply received a ticket to a taping. She had no idea he had already found her face on the side stage monitor the moment the studio doors opened. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. Pacino was mid-answer, talking about the early years, the lean period, the stretch of time before anyone knew his name, when he looked out at the third row and saw Ellie holding the program up. He knew it immediately. Not from the image, from the shape of it, the color of the cover, the way she held it with both hands, facing outward, the way you finally show something after holding it inward for a very long time. 54 years of keeping a secret, standing up in a third-row seat on legs that no longer cooperated the way she needed them to, holding a piece of paper above the heads of the people in front of her. He had the same program in his jacket pocket. He had carried it to the studio that afternoon and had not let it leave his person since. He moved through the center aisle without rushing. Not with urgency, with the kind of deliberateness that tells you someone has thought for a long time about exactly this moment and has decided to be entirely present inside it. The people seated on either side of the aisle stepped back without being asked, the way a crowd moves not from instruction but from instinct, from the recognition that something real is passing through. Jimmy Fallon looked at the audience, then at Pacino, then at the third row. He said, "Quietly, folks. I think we need to let this happen." And then he said nothing else for a very long time. Ellie was standing when Pacino reached her. She was 77 years old, and she was thin, and she was wearing a gray coat buttoned to the collar. She was holding the program with both hands, the inside cover turned away from the room, the way she had kept it for 54 years, private. Even now, even here. Pacino reached out and put both hands around her hands without taking the program from her. He didn't pull it toward him. He just held it with her, from the other side, so they were both holding it at the same time. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "You kept it." Her hands were steady. "I use it in class." The back half. A pause. "I never showed them the inside. I brought mine." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and drew out his copy, the same program, older, softer at the folds, carried in various pockets across various decades. He unfolded it carefully, the way you unfold something that has been folded for a very long time. He held it open between them. "For Ellie, you saw me before anyone else did, October 1969. She looked at it for a long time. Her voice, when it came, was very quiet. You remembered that night. I remembered everything." He paused. "You were the reason I went back the next night. And the night after that." Her eyes were full. "I didn't want pity. I just wanted you to know that night mattered to someone." He said slowly, "That night is the reason there were other nights." He held her face in both hands for a moment, the way you hold a face you weren't certain you would ever see again. Then he stepped back. He did not return to the stage. He sat down beside her in the third row, and he stayed there. The standing ovation began somewhere near the back of the room and moved forward like a wave from a single point of origin. 300 people on their feet, and the sound in that studio was not quite applause, but something older and less organized than applause. Questlove stood up from behind his drum kit and did not sit back down. The director did not cut to commercial. The cameraman closest to the third row held his shot on Pacino and Ellie and did not move it. Jimmy Fallon stood at the edge of the stage with one hand pressed flat over his mouth. He did not say a word. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Eleanor Vasquez returned to Yonkers the morning after the taping. Al Pacino called her twice a week for the next 9 weeks. Her daughters framed both copies of the program, side by side, and they hang now on the bedroom wall in the spot where Ellie could see them from her bed each morning. Ellie died on a Monday morning in May. She was 77. Her daughters wrote the obituary. They described her as a teacher who believed in people before those people believed in themselves. Al Pacino attended the memorial service in Yonkers. He sat in the 3rd row. He did not speak publicly. He stayed long after everyone else had left, talking quietly with her daughters. On the drive back to the city, he told his assistant he wanted to find the theater in Greenwich Village, the 60-seat room, the cold alley, the space heater that ticked. He said he wanted to know if it was still standing. The best performances are the ones nobody witnessed.